I'm going to talk a little bit about, before I get into the specific part of the board aspect of this, I thought I'd talk a little bit about our work inside our district, which is kind of moving along similar to Mr. Warlick's presentation this morning, and a lot of other work that's emerging around the state and around the country right now. Because I'm optimistic today. I'm going to say a fairly long-term Twitter user. I've been following Mr. Warlick since 1940. No, he's been out there for a long time. And back when we started talking about Twitter in Vermont, there weren't many people using it. Today, halfway through his presentation, I had, there were several, if not a dozen or so, tweets percolating through the audience. So to hear the project-based learning and a lot of things that are percolating along through the state right now, I think these same themes are emerging around the country in schools. And it doesn't really line up to federal education policy. I'll just say that as a caveat today. If you're expecting some sort of presentation that would reinforce your worldview that Common Core and state assessments are a good idea, this is probably not going to help you. You'll probably experience some dissonance, or at least I hope you will. Okay? Because one of the lessons I've come to sort of learn in the last couple of weeks and months is that accountability should be pointed back to the local community. It should not be pointed to the state or federal government. And when we try to do state and federal accountability, it becomes very inefficient, very expensive, and really doesn't help us improve instruction. So that's what I've learned, and I want to share that, how we sort of connected that with our work in the teaching and learning areas. A key element to that, I think you can see the slide. You talk about one-to-one computing and putting technology in the hands of the kids, which is really important. Another key element, I think, is what's called a learning management system. You have to have this piece of infrastructure that connects learners, both students and adults, in a single organization and potentially in the world. But I think it's something, board members, you want to think about. It should make sense to you. In all the different things you could invest your scarce tax dollars in, doesn't it make sense that an organization whose core business is teaching and learning should have a system called learning management system, of all things? And unfortunately, a lot of what consumes our dollars in terms of systems is this thing called a student information system, which is really a compliance engine. It doesn't really do much to change teaching and learning in a positive way. So one of the more prudent decisions we made is we try to do as little compliance as we can in our organization. It's sort of our mission statement. We struggle doing compliance. Our data guy has to really beat his head against the wall to do compliance requests like the SEC data request. We didn't do that well. We got an F- on something. But what we do well is social learning with kids and adults. So we did that by putting emphasis on what's called a learning management system. And what's fairly, I would say unique, but I think a good practice is how we use our learning management system. We don't use it just to stick all the old high school courses into Model R. What we do, and we don't have our own high school. We push the kids all over. Bird Academy is our primary recipient in our area high school. What we do is we use it for three different things. And this adds a certain synergy to the organization. Once this starts to happen, you start to have sort of a viral approach to building quality teaching and learning systems. And that's what we're after, because we think we can build a better system from the ground up than we can from taking 5 years to build standards and then 5 years to implement tests. That thing, does that make sense to anyone that would improve instruction quickly? Hey, come on in. How's it going? You just think of that as a business model, I talk with my board members. One of the first things we did, I've been superintendent of BRSU for 6 years. One of the first things we ever did together as a group of districts was to buy photocopiers together. Okay? It took us 8 months to do a common leasing agreement for photocopiers. Because what we ended up doing was putting it under a municipal lease, and supervisory unions are not municipalities under the law. So we had to have one district become the leaseholder and then create a series of municipal inter-lease agreements among the districts. Now, it saved us a bunch of money, And I remember the board members were pretty happy about that experience. When we got it all done, it literally took 8 months. And we were like a big stack of inter-municipal lease agreements. We dropped our lease rate from 18% down to 3%. Per copy cost to 0.00046 as opposed to 10 cents. That kind of thing. We're pretty happy about that. And I remember saying at the end of that, I don't know what business can survive today to take 8 months to make a simple decision like buying photocopiers, For the most part, photocopiers are not a high emotional issue in schools. There are some people that are emotionally attached to that decision in your schools, but for the most part, it's not something boards are going to disagree on if you can show them it's going to save you a lot of money. On the other hand, when we get into some of this technology, this becomes a much more complicated decision-making process. The issues of power and control, very significant. But when you think about the standards-based approach, if it takes 8 months to do photocopiers, does it make sense it would take us 5 years to create standards? Or I don't know what's the timeline of Common Core? Is it 5 years? I keep saying 5 years, but I mean we have Common Core in reading and math. We don't have it in the other areas yet. Does that make sense? And the idea is that we're going to have standards, and somehow that's going to trickle down to the classroom, and the kids are going to be improving. I don't know. We're for the first year. I have a school that's 2 schools that are identified for the first year of adequate yearly progress. Year 1, AYP, along with 73% of the other schools in our state. And we got those results. We got AYP notice in August from results that were given last October. Okay, so now we're building a plan to address those deficiencies. The plan is due December, but the kids have already taken the test that's going to be used for next year's accountability. So our plan, does it make sense? I don't know. But it doesn't make sense to me at all. So when we talk about, so you hear Mr. Warlick saying today, 20th century, 21st century learning. The other thing, what we're talking about is using 21st century management design ideas, organizational design ideas, as opposed to 20th century ones. Because a lot of what we still reach for tools is command and control. We talk about the kids all need to be doing 21st century stuff, but from a policy standpoint, we grab 20th century command and control. Standards, top-down, PD, this will work someday, doesn't work. And the 21st century model is viral and lateral, and that works. We have great examples in business today, Google, so forth. These companies understand how to do this in a lateral way, and this is what we're finding works really well in education. So what we've done is we're leveraging a highly social learning management system. It's called Haiku, but there's several out there you can use. And what it does is it connects students, adults in a common ecosystem of learning. So what I mean by that is not only student content being deployed out, but adults are also organizing their own content. So when Jackie's organizing a professional development activity or the principals have to solve a problem, they're using the same tools that the teachers are using to create lessons and organize their classes. And we're also using it as an external communications portal. So it all comes together as a single tool set, so you end up with teachers becoming very fluent using certain tools. So I'm just sharing a little bit of what we do. So the definition of when we say transformation, you hear that a lot in Vermont. I was actually a participant in the original transformation conference in the state. We walked out of that weekend in Grafton saying, well, what's the definition? We spent 2 days and no one really was sure about what it meant. My definition is becoming the rapid identification, dissemination, implementation, evaluation of best practice across the system in order to personalize learning for students. So it's the rapidness of the development cycle that we need to, I think, take issue with. And this idea coming from David Hargraves from the UK, a lot of this comes from the UK like 10 years ago, which is interesting. I don't know why, we haven't figured that out here. But, the definition of best practice in our organization isn't just what does research say is the best way to do something. It has to be the best way to do something as proved by research, but it also must meet 2 important other tests. One is it has to have high leverage, meaning for a limited amount of effort, it has to have a big impact on the kids. Otherwise, we don't do it. It doesn't make any sense. Oh, this is the best way to teach reading. It'll cost you $40,000 in 10 years to train up your staff. We need to find ways to do that for little impact. High transferability, another key one. It has to be able to spread across the organization very quickly. Doesn't help us if we can't spread it. So the idea with the learning management system is that good practices evolving to best practice. So a new definition of best practice becomes these good practices that are also high leverage and high transferable across the system. Okay? Just want to give you a sense of the things we're working on. So from an open source standpoint, the path to transformation in schools is decentralized, distributed, and disciplined. What I'm going to talk about today is the disciplining part, which I think boards have a huge role in. Okay, because I've been in Vermont working in Vermont as an administrator since 97, I think. Yeah, 97. And I remember coming into Vermont where the graduation standards in math and science where you could take 5 credits either or. Literally, when I think that's true, when I was a principal in Vermont in 97, you could graduate from high school without taking any science. So we talk about today having to take algebra. What we did to ourselves, our own standards, without external pressure, was 5 credits, either or, math or science. So, we can't just build it from the bottom up without disciplining the system, being accountable and responsible. So, what I'll talk today is a little bit about how boards can do that. And we're working through this in our own district, but here are the elements that we're doing to discipline our system. And what I'm going to be talking largely about today is number one, which are boards and policies. Getting the communities involved with this, in establishing and describing what the community hopes to see for outcomes for kids. We also have some other systems, some system benchmarks. I'll show you in a second. We're working with a gentleman out of Maine who's done a lot of the evaluation of the one-to-one computing in Maine, Dr. Silvernail. He's designing a formative internal sort of rubric and evaluation system for us to make sure we're on track to personalizing learning for kids. That's our objective. This idea of rapid development of best practices, that's the LMS and working out PD and curriculum development through in a viral manner. We're interjected something called NWA MAPS test. Some of you must be using that in your districts. It's a computer-based adaptive assessment. Gives us valid external data that we get 3 times a year from non-kids, and we can feed that to the boards, feed it to our teachers. It actually provides, unlike the NECAPs and the state accountability system, we get the data back in a week. Gives the teachers some real-time input, and we can aggregate that reporting up for cross-district reporting immediately. Standards-based curriculum, we're lining things with a Common Core. Standards are important, but it's not the end-all. And then what we're shooting for now is this idea of documenting individual student through ePortfolio. So that's a big one. We heard the conversation this morning with the Academy kids, what you saw there. All of that, in my view, could be put into an ePortfolio and measured against a rubric and evaluated, performing arts, all those kinds of things. So we're shooting for that. So, and feel free to interrupt me as I talk really fast. I just want to show you, here's this logic model we're working on as part of our evaluation scheme. Sort of, I don't know if you can read that back there, but this is a tool, we're creating an internal evaluation scheme of our system. The outputs we're looking for are students developing sort of this owning their own learning and then the system of lateral innovation among the teachers. And we're working on some discrete tasks right now to do that. Just want to give you a sense of some of the work. I can put this on the web for you. But the board part of it is huge. And everyone have a handout or access to one near you? So I'll just talk about this a little bit. So we have been working, like many Vermont districts, on working together. Like I said, one of our big accomplishments was the photocopier lease buyout. Around 2009, we did a mass policy adoption process. And we have 9 districts and 5 operate schools. So what we focused on were just the 5 that operate schools. And we had policies, I had one district that had a policy on where teachers could still smoke, We had some dead insects in our policy manual in a few places. They were old. And what we did is we created a model of our policy manual where we agreed, just sort of a gentleman's agreement, if you will, that the mandatory policies that the state requires us to have, we would quarantine in one section of our policy manual, and that they would be all the same across the district. So there's about 25 or 26 of those, 27 if that's counting bullying. We decided that we, as agreement among the districts, we would have the same mandatory policies, put them in the policy manual as mandatory, get them out of the way. And then we brought over a section of policy called local policy, which were policies that districts had based on their peculiar situation. For instance, because we don't operate a high school, we have tuition policies, how we handle payment for those kinds of things. Those districts have those policies. We brought them over. We put them in a container called local policy. But we also decided back in 2009 that we ultimately want to do this thing called ENDS policies, which is a term come from policy governance. And I'd say we're on that path to doing policy governance, but we're not quite there. But this is sort of our first step in it. And after a couple of years of trying to figure this out, we decided, all right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So last year, we started this public engagement process. And what I'm going to share with you today is Dorset's experience doing that. Dorset operates a K-8 school with their K-12 school district, with both of their kids being tuitioned to Burnsburg Academy. So your first handout is a script that I wrote, in conjunction with the board members on how to organize a forum. So what we wanted to do was to get input from the community about what kids should know and be able to do. And we wanted to get them into a future disposition towards this. We didn't want them to start thinking back, well, when I was here in 1950, Have you read Jamie Vollmer's book? Schools can't do it alone. He calls it nostalgia. American education policy is a combination of nostalgia and amnesia. That can exist. So you can imagine getting community people together and just talking about what kids should know and be able to do. That's potentially not a fun activity. And you know who's going to turn out, right? And so people have an axe to grind or so forth, or your parents, and you want to get multiple perspectives. So the whole goal of this activity was to put people on the same sheet of music and get them into a future disposition and to gather some data. Okay? So what we do, this was the script, which is sort of the brainstorm, tentative brainstorm of what we're going to do. We're going to, a room like this would be set up perfectly actually, because if you have round tables, even better. The difference with our setup is we have tablecloths you could write on. Okay? So that's how we gathered the data. So what we did is we had paper tablecloths, and there's a series of videos I'll walk you through. I'm not going to show them all the way through, but you might recognize some of them. But the idea was after every video, people would write their comments on the tablecloths. Okay? And then we'd make you move to a new table, and the first thing you did before we watched the next video was to read what other people had written about the first video, and you would react to that. You would add your comments to the tablecloth. And we do that in 3 steps. At the end of the night, we roll up the tablecloths and have someone type up everything from the tablecloths and put it into a Google Doc and share it out. Okay? That's sort of the structure. School chair was sort of the person introducing the concept, and I'll show you that document in a minute. Giving the purpose, putting some structure to it. We selected 3 videos, which I'll just go over briefly in a minute, but there's piles of these kinds of videos. Yes, sir?
Did you invite the public, or did you handpick?
No, we invited.
Opened it right
we opened it, and then we did some targeted inviting to make sure, certain people. Yeah, but that's a good point. Thank you. I forgot. Every community has stakeholders or key people you'd really like to see. People that are intelligent but always vote down the budget, or are key, speakers at town meeting. We wanted those people to come. So, yes, we invited everyone in the community, but we sent out specific handwritten invitations to certain individuals. We really wanted a diverse group, and we got one with this event. This was really interesting because we had all kinds of folks, and when they were sitting around tables, we encouraged them to mix up. Don't sit next to someone you know. Okay? So, a key part of this was selecting the videos themselves. Which videos would get these people on the same sheet of music right out the bat. So the powerful thing about videos is that they do that. So when people come to the event, when they came to this event, first when they walked in the door, they had no idea what they were doing that night. Then why are we here? I thought we were talking about closing the school. I thought we were talking about test scores. No, we're going to tell you in a minute, but just sit down, relax for a second. You show them the video, immediately they have a common base of knowledge, and they're able to start talking immediately. It took little to no facilitation once they got into that first video. They were on their own and running. We basically just kept an eye on what was going on at each table, if they needed clarification or something like that, but literally no facilitation on any of the tables. They ran off and did it. So 3 videos. I'll show you real quick, give you a sense of it. I don't have my speakers with me, but I think... Let me see a show of hands who've seen Sir Ken Robinson Changing Education. Okay? Pretty large group. When we did this in the community, very few community members had ever seen this kind of video or this video specifically. So this was an eye-opener for them. If you can imagine seeing this for the first time, a lot of folks were like, wow, I didn't even realize the school board talked about that kind of stuff. We thought you just talked about who left the lights on in the gym last night. Let me just skip. If you see on the front of page 2, it looks like Dorset School District ends form. This is the handout. This is the handout we put on the table for everyone. The other letter is a letter that went home to people in the mail from the board chair. This was what we gave people as a handout when they walked into the room that night. This will point out a couple things. The only question they were there to answer that night was what should students know and be able to do? What should be the purposes or desired results of their education? That was it. Okay. Intentionally left off one huge word there. Anyone want to guess what it is? School. Okay, no mention of the word school. When we talk about ends and means, schooling is a means to an end. We wanted to talk about the ends. What is the purpose of education for our kids? Not how are we going to organize it? Are we going to shut it down? Are we going to, don't talk about school. Let's just talk about education. If you can do that, you can have a great conversation. If you talk about schooling, you get sucked into the pucker brush pretty quick. Okay? But if you start just talking about what do you want kids to know and be able to do, opens up a world of possibility. Okay? So we use these kinds of videos to stimulate that thinking. We gave some study guide questions. This is a little blog the board members put together. It worked out. They were concerned about people not being able to be there that night, so they wanted to set it up. And this is a community that would use this kind of, a blog approach. Not all my communities would do that. But you can see the questions they were given just to stimulate your thinking. To what extent should students, and this comes right from the video, should education prepare students for the future? Has this changed? To what extent should all students be educated? Why or why not? Should education be focused more on filling up students with knowledge or waking each student up to their personal abilities? To what extent should education be standardized or customized? Okay? Okay, what we did is they'd watch the video in silence. We'd say, all right, you've got 10 minutes to talk among your table. Don't write anything yet. Just talk. Once they were done talking, quiet time to write. Okay? So you give those people that like to have quiet time an option to think without having the verbal people drown them out. So did that. Then we moved on to the second video, which is, these were selected to stimulate, slightly different perspectives. The next one, kind of famous, and not maybe as famous, but really good, Dan Meyer. And this gets to the math war issue, which is, I like getting math, people have all preconceived ideas about their math. It's a high school math teacher. He sells a product to a market that doesn't want it. Okay? So what Mr. Meyer started, this is fairly, don't say old video, maybe a couple months anyway, no, it's a couple of years, where he would spend time deconstructing math problems in textbooks because they were teaching the kids too much. Gave them all the cues to figure out the answer. So he would deconstruct the question so the kids actually had to think. And one of the problems is he shows there, he's filling up a water tank with a hose, and he's talking about using your phone as a teacher. How you could use your phone to do this really easily. So you go out in the backyard, you're filming this video, and that's how he starts the math problem. It's like, well, how long will it take for the thing to fill up with water? And he's got the water on low, and they just watch it and watch, and the kids are watching the time thing up in the corner on the video, and they're like, but it leads them into kind of the mathematical aspect of how to calculate the volume and how that works. So his point was, the math problems in the textbooks today are too easy. They give the kids all the cues. All the answers on the test or the test problems they get are all scripted. They change the variables a little bit, but the same stuff. So we just teach kids really good at how decoding textbooks, not to think. So, people that are about the math war thing in the audience were like, hey, they kind of like this guy a little bit. So the questions, to what extent should education be relevant to students? To what extent should students struggle with complex learning situations? In some of our communities, we have some affluent parents who want things to be more demanding, but they don't necessarily want it to be so demanding that their kids don't get the A that they were desired or deserved as a being born, right? So, that conversation about how difficult it should be is always interesting. To what extent should students be taught learning skills such as initiative, perseverance, in addition to academic content? So should kids learn how to learn? We hear that a lot. And everyone said yes, absolutely. So they wrote, moving around the room, writing this stuff down. And the last one is just a promo piece from New Brunswick, which has a great document on it, too. I like this one a lot because I always think of New Brunswick being the same size as Vermont. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but I think, we could do this in Vermont, have a promo piece about Vermont education. We should do this. They did it as a province. If Canadians can do it, we can do it. Right? So this is an upbeat, sort of wild rock and roll kind of thing. And we had, when we're doing this in a room, we have full, not like today, we have full audio visual. The room's rocking with loud music. And parents, a lot of parents did like that. Some of the old folks do too. But anyway, so to what extent should students be educated for specific careers? So we hear this rhetoric today, I call it rhetoric of career college readiness. What does that mean? The parents, and we deal with K-8 parents, they really want their kids to be educated for a specific career that doesn't exist yet? I don't know. We talk about that. Does education need to change? Anyway, after all that was done, we gathered up all the tablecloths. Everyone, they contributed, they moved around the room, and then we typed it up. Someone had to type it all up, and we loaded it into a Google Doc. And the raw data on the Google Doc was then also put on the website so people could see all the responses from that event. This is kind of in reverse chronological order. And this URL, by the way, is dorsetends.blogspot.com. If you want to, I'll put it up here if you want to go check out, what people wrote down. This is just raw data. It's not organized at this point. Is it on there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Forgot. So one of the things on this little blog is all the data. Just click on that link. You can see all the data. The interesting thing, we had a ton of data come out of this one event. We had about 65 people show up, which wasn't bad. Like I said, all kinds of diverse folks from the community, old and young, parents, non-parents, some staff members. And, so before we started to organize all this stuff, we just started to look at it and make some observations. The first thing that jumped out at us was no one said anything about, I want my kids to do well in state assessments. It just didn't show up. The issue of whether that's important or not wasn't represented in our parents' feedback. That was a major aha. And I said the issue about staff, we didn't invite staff necessarily to do this end of it because under the policy governance sort of model, staff are by definition not owners of the organization. We wanted the community members who are not employees. Employees by definition are the means by which you achieve the community's end. So we brought them into another part of this process, but not at this brainstorm level. Okay? So anyway, there's all the raw data. And then what the board had to do was to start to distill that down into an ends policy. And these are actually, policies that the board would adopt. And then we're going to create an evaluation system that goes along with that called monitoring. So on the back page of that second page is a draft ends policy that we gave the boards a template to work on. And this template was created by an administrative team. We did this in a couple hours one afternoon, not looking at the videos, but just basically sitting with the principals real quick and saying, hey, what should education be about? So we brainstormed on a whiteboard, just wrote down a bunch of stuff. If we had to create an ends policy, what would it be like? And then tried to categorize it, refined it a little bit through the use of sharing it out on a Google Doc. And then this is the draft that we gave to the boards. We said, so anyway, here's what the principals thought about this. If we had to do a format of a true ends policy, here's what it would look like. So the format of an ends policy, the first paragraph of this global end, sort of like you think of a mission statement, but it has to have three components according to the ends idea. What purpose, to who, and at what cost. And what happens with this kind of process is you end up with all this detailed data, but then it has to be rolled up into some general statements. And then, of course, you lose meaning along the way. So then you have to unpack it all the time and test it. So BRSU schools will educate all of their students. So firstly, all students. So they become self-fulfilled people. Self-fulfilled to us meant well-educated, healthy, knowledgeable, self-actualized. They're active, civic-minded citizens of the world. We want them to be active, purposeful, civic-minded. We talk about, that's one of the things I heard a lot is this idea of civic ethics, the idea of supporting democracy, education for the purpose of democracy, of the world, that they're now participating in a much larger democracy at a cost comparable to other Vermont supervisory needs. So that's our approach on the costing. But then we had to get more prescriptive, the board had to get more prescriptive, and get into the actual specifics. So in addition to that general statement, then we then break that down into three areas: core academics, dispositions towards learning, and civic ethics. Okay? So this process was concluded last year. The boards right now, we've had two boards, Gordon's board and one board, actually adopt their ends policies. We have three others are en route. Two of the other three have voted once, and they'll do a second vote coming up next month. And I have one board that hasn't voted yet on the first vote, but that'll happen next week. So this part's moving forward. The other part we're doing, and actually this was kind of interesting, that typically if you're familiar with policy governance ends versus means kind of approach, that whole thing lends itself well to centralization or consolidation of districts. We're not going to do that. We're still under the sort of the photocopier leasing kind of idea. We're going to try to work together as much as we can without doing consolidation. So the ends, to me, as this got going, originally I was trying to think about should we do this at the SU level, give it to everyone, but it really came back to say, well, no, each community has to kind of engage their community about the future of teaching and learning. So what we decided to do was we give them a template that they can vary on this, but the thing that's really critical that we coordinate is the means, what's called the monitoring policy. And the monitoring policy we're not done with yet, but that policy describes what kind of evaluations and accountability systems will occur and when. So we agree as a bunch of districts, like on the core academics, 3 times a year in these specific months, the superintendent will bring to those board meetings in those months a report on how the students are doing in core academics. And we're going to leverage some of our things from our LMS, some things from our NWA MAP score to sort of meet the board's requests in that regard. Dispositions towards learning, creativity, resilience, self-motivation, all those kinds of things. We're going to have to be creative to find ways to demonstrate to the board that students are actually learning those things or becoming that. We'll be using our LMS a lot. You can put video in there, part of the e-portfolio system. We'll be showing that to board members at the board meeting. Likewise, civic ethics, we can pull a lot of those things through surveying students or having students come to board meetings and talking about their democratic leadership and so forth. So if you're familiar with that or not so familiar with the accountability piece, that's almost like a separate presentation. But the idea is the boards, they own this at this point. They feel pretty good about now we're in charge of really the purpose of the district, and then we're, as administration, saying we're going to be accountable to your ends. And this information starts to trickle down to all parts of the organization. So we have report cards. Principals starting to use this information on report cards. So you get the part on your report card that says, well, what's Johnny's behavior like? Is he nice in class? Instead, we use the dispositions language. Is he creative? Is he, so that we can document that through report cards to the board as well. So lesson learned for us in this process. As much as we're engaged in the one-to-one learning and all that kind of stuff, and the really cool things are starting to happen in terms of building curriculum virally in our organization, I think the probably thing I'm most excited about is bringing this online at the same time, that we're actually sort of reinforcing democracy, local democracy, to support a vision for our future for our kids.